All right, now I want to get to the great big story. You told me a couple good stories the other day, man. I want to get to the
Hmm.
John Coltrane story.
Okay. All right. Well, John Coltrane, when I first heard him, let me just say this. I didn't like the way he played. I heard him on Kind of Blue. I like Cannonball Adderley. I thought
Mhm,
Cannonball had it together and Train was a searching. But then
mhm,
I heard some other records later on. I said, yeah. But when I heard him, when he was, we're talking about the 60s now, 1966, I was in college, my first year of college. I heard he was playing at the Vanguard. I didn't particularly like the way he played at the time. It was the avant-garde. My father took me to hear him at the Village Gate. Mostly I heard Elvin Jones. So I said, I'm gonna call John Coltrane up. Nobody believed me. I'm in my dormitory in Hartford. So I had to drink some rum to get my nerve together. So I called the Vanguard. So Max Gordon answered the phone. Blessing Max Gordon, because he set it up. He didn't know me. I said, Mr. Gordon, can I speak to John Coltrane? Just like that. He said, well, he's playing right now. I said, what time is he on the break? He told me. I called him back. I said, can I speak to John Coltrane? He said, he handed the phone over to Train. I introduced myself, told him I was a saxophone player trying to, learn and study saxophone in college. So he said, when you get in town? I said, well, I'll be there, Christmas break. He said, well, give me a call when you get to town. He gave me his number, and I was so elated. I was just so happy, like I won $1 million. So as soon as I got home, I called him up because you couldn't call on the cell phone. So I had to wait till I got home, called him up. He didn't answer. Alice answered, his wife, Alice Coltrane.
mhm.
So she took the message. So then I was doing something, maybe practicing, and mother said, Gene, there's a John Coltrane on the phone. So, whoa, he called me back. So I say to people, listen, I call you, call me back. I said, John Coltrane called me back. Who are you not to call me back? You know. So anyway, we talked. So he invited me to a concert he was doing at the Village Theater. So that was on Second Avenue and 13th Street, in lower East Side Manhattan. So I went to the concert, my friend and I, and his woman. And as Train came in with his entourage, I couldn't even speak to him. I was just so awed of his presence. He walked in there with Alice and Pharoah Sanders and the whole entourage. And so I sat upstairs in the balcony, and next to me was the great Larry Young, who was the first person I ever played with. And so Ornette Coleman was the opening act. I think he had David Eisenson, I think Ed Blackwell on drums, a trio.
Wow.
He had his top hat, he had his purple suit and his black shirt. Don't forget it. He was clean.
Wow.
So he played, and I enjoyed it. And then here comes Train with Alice, and they played a duet together. Unbelievable. And I noticed that if somebody just walked up on the stage and grabbed the soprano, he just walked over to the end of the stage, took it back just calmly. So at the end, after the concert, I went backstage. It was easy to get backstage in those days. So I had my friend and his lady. So when I was trying to speak to Train, or Nicole was trying to rap to his wife. I mean his girlfriend. So so I was very nervous trying to speak to him. He had a wad of cash in his hand trying to pay the musicians. So I was trying to say something to him. He said, he forgot who I was. I said, oh man. So he said, oh yeah, yeah. He said, well, we can't talk back here. There's too much going on. He said, can you come by my house? I'm like, yeah. So he gave me his address. It was out in Huntington Station, Long Island. If you know anything about Huntington, the directions are difficult. I couldn't say, hold on, can you repeat that? So I got out there. It had snowed. It was a snowstorm. It had stopped though, but the snow was pretty deep. So when I got out there, I got lost. Then I got stuck in the snow. I went to somebody's house, and you got to realize there were no phones, no pay phones on the street, and it was all white area. I knocked on somebody's door and asked them for a shovel. They lent me a shovel. tried to get out. I bent the shovel, gave him the shovel back. So I said, well, can I use your phone? They let me use their phone.
Wow.
Yeah, I said that too, So I called him up. He said, where are you? So the people told him where I was. He said, oh, you're a long way away. So he came out to get me. He hired a snow plow, the snow plow in the area. He paid him to get me out the snow. He said, follow me. So I followed, he was flying. And when we got around to where he lived, it was like cornfields. I would have never got there if he hadn't came out and got me. I would never have gotten there.
Hmm.
So we got to his house, and you could tell he was tired from playing, but he was sick at the time.
Hmm.
And I'm talking to him, asking him questions about how he started, asking what he practiced at a certain period of his life. That's when he wrote out Giant Steps, which I had never heard before. He wrote the tune out, and I went to the piano. He had an alto on the piano, and there was a harp next to the piano, and I played it slowly. He played it with me on the alto.
Huh.
I wish I recorded it, but he never told me what the tempo was. And he wrote out all the changes from the album Coltrane Sound, with the pedal point and how each song was like Satellite from How High the Moon, Liberia's from Night Tunisia. All these tunes had a pedal point with the Giant Steps types of changes. And but I had never heard these tunes before. And I asked him questions like, you said in the back of the Crescent album that you did that you wanted to play something that had never been played before. So he said, well, I changed up on that. I want to play something that's very basic, but I never found out what that was. Also, he had a couple of records, Herbie Hancock, Imperial Isles, that was worn out. Archie Shepp's Fire Music, that was worn out. He was supposed to record again with Miles. He was looking forward to that with Herbie Hancock, Ron Carter, and Tony Williams. So I don't even know if they know that. I never asked them.
I've never heard that before, that he was supposed to record with Miles.
Yeah, I have never seen that or written before either. So I like to ask Herbie or Ron that. I forgot to ask him when I saw them. But he told me some things I'm sure nobody knew. He loved Thelonious Monk. He loved some Thelonious Monk. He loved Miles, his leadership, because Miles gave him the opportunity to develop, because when he was in Philly, he was just another tenor player. He wasn't even the best tenor player in Philly. He was playing with Jimmy Smith, but he played all the time and was studying, practicing all the time. And the music was, everybody was learning and getting it together, and the music was all everywhere. You can go from jam session to jam session. And that's how he was learning. But when he got with Thelonious Monk gave him some tunes. He said playing with him was like walking to an empty elevator shaft. You had to know the music because he would stop playing and start dancing and walk away and come back and would never miss a beat. Never miss a beat. So he was very influential in John Coltrane because there was a time when John Coltrane played with Miles Davis. He was abusing himself. He was getting high. He was on heroin, drinking a lot of alcohol. Actually, the whole band was doing that. And at one of the gigs, Miles said, listen, I got some important people coming so you can get some better work. I want you to be on your P's and Q's. But Train was nodding and he looked bad. His clothes were wrinkled and everything. So after the set, they went in the back. Miles Davis punched Train in the stomach and fired him. And Monk said, you don't have to take that. You can come play with me. But Monk didn't have any gigs at the time. So Train went back to Philadelphia, get himself together. And I heard he sounded bad, but he was going cold turkey. And he got himself together and he felt the spiritual awakening, which he talked about on The Love Supreme. And, he was telling me these things, and I felt like I had been knowing him for a long time. He was confiding a lot of things with me. I felt very special. But the thing about it, when I think about my relationship with John Coltrane, I think about his humanity. It makes me feel like he made me feel very special. he would say, like, I'm still trying to learn how to play the saxophone. Um, and he practiced incessantly. He was very, very dedicated. He was a very spiritual person. And he was great. A lot of people idolized him. However, when he walked around the streets, if he walked around the streets of New York, people wouldn't even know who he was, you know. But after he died, he got very, very, very popular. But he was just a great, great person besides being a great musician. And he just made me feel like, I mean, we played together, and I know he was sick and I didn't want to wear him out, but he wrote out these things for me. What else did he do? He talked about Miles, talked about playing with him again. And during this time he was playing the avant-garde, that's when he made the Ballads album and the album with Johnny Hartman.
Right.
And I'm sure people thought he couldn't play anymore because in Newark, that's where I was born, in Newark. There's a club called the Front Room. They were more used to Jack McDuff, Jimmy McGriff, to get you going, to move and tapping your foot.
Right.
But Train at this time, he had Pharoah Sanders, he was beating his chest. And, he was heavily into the avant-garde. And people, boy, they said, what? Who's this? They'll put on the Miles Davis record. They said, that's John Coltrane. I don't know who the hell that is up on the stage. That's what they were talking about him. He almost didn't get paid, because they didn't want to hear that. So it was very difficult for him. I believe that hurt him, but that's where he was at the time. Plus, another story I read that he went out to Detroit around that same time that I met him, a couple of months later, still snowing, because he went out to Detroit. He went there early because Alice is from Detroit, his wife. And a lot of musicians got stuck. It was a jazz concert sponsored by George Wein. So some musicians couldn't make it. And so Monk was out there. So George asked Train if he would play with Monk. He would say, I'd love to. Now, remember, this is during the height of his avant-garde. So he played like he used to play. He wasn't playing avant-garde. He was playing like he used to play. So George Wein said, wow, that was great. That was great. So how would you like to continue playing like that? So Train said, no, I'm continuing doing what I'm doing. Another thing he told me, he looked back on tenor players, the older tenor players. He wanted to study them. Particularly, he loved Don Byas. He used to be in Europe, and when he wasn't working, he would go hear Don. He'd be somewhere in the corner listening to Don Byas, incognito. He loved some Don Byas. So I think he wanted to go back and listen and learn from the older tenor players, but he ran out of time. And if you remember, look at his recorded legacy from 1957 up until he died. That's only 10 years.
It's only 10 years and changed the world.
That's right. He went through so many styles. When he mastered one, he would go to something else, then to something else. I heard a recording, a bootleg recording, where he played a couple of styles that I had never heard on record. He played the Sheets of Sound style, then he played the next style that he did. And I think he kind of developed that style because he ruined his mouthpiece. The mouthpiece he had been playing, making all those records on the Prestige records and whatnot, he ruined it. And
but he had someone work on it, or he broke it, or what?
Yeah.
Oh.
So the next mouthpiece, if you look at Duke Ellington, that record, he had mouthpieces on the piano. If you look at that record. And he was trying to get a particular sound and he couldn't get it. Because that mouthpiece gave him a sound he could play real fast. He couldn't do that in his other mouthpieces. So I think he developed this style because of the mouthpiece.
I completely understand, and I remember reading a comment on the Johnny Hartman recording, and he was complaining his mouthpiece wasn't the way he wanted, so he played a certain way on that record.
That's right.
I completely get that, because mouthpiece troubles change your whole playing, man. If it's too much resistance or too dark, you can't feel the articulation. You know,
Right. Mm-hmm. And
that's
then he was studying this from the Slominski book that Barry Harris, he
right,
recommended for him, and he practiced out of there. And you can hear a lot of that in the cadenza of "I Want to Talk About You." It's like a
man.
saxophone lesson.
That is that it's all in there, isn't it? I know what you're
Yeah.
talking about. I used to listen to that back in Pittsburgh. That and try to
Mm-hmm.
pick some of that off. But everything, even Rick Margitza said that everything is in that cadenza right there. If you really pay attention, you know.
Yeah. Another thing about Train, which a lot of the younger players missed out on, was that he was always soulful. Train was so when he played rhythm and blues, it was authentic. He played in
Right.
the Gay Cross band, he played Johnny Hodges band, he played in rhythm and blues, Big Maybell, I think, and he could walk the bar.
He walked the bar.
Yeah, yeah. So he came from that tradition, you know, and even in the avant-garde, he was still soulful.
Right.
He would be screaming and still be. It was like imitating a preacher when they get in a sanctified church. His father was a preacher,
Hmm.
you know. So all of that stuff came together. So it wasn't just a bunch of notes. It was feeling. Plus, back in the '50s, back when he was in Philadelphia, like I said, They played all the time. That made a big difference too. You practiced, but you played all the time. Odine Pope told me that Odine Pope is from Philly. I played with his saxophone choir,
Mm-hmm.
and he told me that when Train got the call to go Miles Davis, he didn't want to go at first because he was working every night with Jimmy Smith 6 nights a week, so it was a steady gig. But he didn't know if he could do that with Miles Davis, but he felt, and maybe somebody else encouraged him. But I think Miles Davis would give you more freedom to really play your horn and get more exposure.
Hmm.
So he went with Miles. So Odine took his place, Odine Pope. Odine told me he would go over to his house. Train would start practicing from the morning. He'd have a thick book of tunes like that. You know, he would go through the music and play what he practiced from the morning. He would take a break, have lunch or whatever. He'd play all the way up until almost the time of the gig. That's how dedicated he was. Then he would play all night. He had that loud organ, with Jimmy Smith. And he did the 6 nights a week. That developed him. So by the time he got with Miles Davis, he had a different sound than Sonny Rollins. People were used to the Sonny Rollins sound. So when Train came on, they heard him. They were disappointed at first because they were used to Sonny's sound. But then after they heard him, they said, "Oh, okay." And it was a good playing for Miles Davis. Miles' sound and Train's sound. It was a great match.
Right.
Great
I,
match.
I agree.
And that group, man, they worked they started in Baltimore, I believe, and Train was going with Juanita Grubbs, and he got married to her down there, and everybody was the best man. That was their first gig in Baltimore.
Wow.
It's clicked. It was of course Miles and Train. You had Paul Chambers. He was about 17 at the time. You had Philly Bill Jones, who Train, they hung together in Philly, who recommended him to the gig.
Right.
And you had Red Garland. What a group. What a group.
Man, that's probably the band that influenced me the most back in Pittsburgh because of the cats coming up, Frank Mahler and Ned Gould, who went on with Harry Connick and Dave Budway, and I know Jeff Watts was in town, but I didn't really know him,
Mm-hmm.
But Eric Kloss was there, and all those cats, and
Oh,
everyone,
Eric Claus.
yeah,
Is he
every
still around?
I believe he's still alive, but I don't know if he can play anymore. The reason that he had lost his hearing and stuff like that is because there's too much oxygen. He was and as a child they used to put some babies had issues in big oxygen bubbles, and they put too much oxygen into his tank, and that's what damaged his sight while he went blind. And then later as he got older, it started to affect his hearing, and that's why he went back to Pittsburgh. But I was very influenced by his playing because I used to go listen to him play. I was way behind all these other cats, man. I didn't know really much about jazz at all. And these guys were all on the transcribing Charlie Parker and all this stuff. But Frank Mahler always talked to me about Miles Davis, right? He was a bad trombone player up in the Army. And bad means great, people. He had his method for learning was he had transcribed about 400 solos. I'm not making that up. That was, and he would remember them. I'm not making this up. So he would, he would go to Carnegie Mellon University. In those days, they didn't lock the school. They just left everything open. So he would go into the practice rooms and spend the night, he said, transcribing and practicing, and sleep during the day, then go back to some jam session or gig and then go back and practice all night. And he had an amazing ability. He taught himself trumpet and trombone. So we'd be sitting around, and, in those days you're getting high. You know what I'm saying? You're sitting around getting high, and Miles would come on, and Frank suddenly start playing the whole solo on trumpet. In his mind, he never wrote none of this stuff down, man. And so I was having trouble getting it together, and I didn't really have a good teacher. And I never forgot one day he said, "Yeah, I mean, this is how Pittsburgh people talk through their nose." I don't know, I'm like, ain't like this. That's why I talk through my nose too. Pittsburgh is nasal, But one time he looked at me and said, "Man, you got a good sound on alto, and you're playing tune, you play good lead out, everything, but you can't blow. But you just need to learn 25 Charlie Parker solos, man." I was kind of slow. It took a little bit for that to sink in, but it eventually did. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. The first time I saw somebody transcribe solos, when I moved to Brooklyn on Cumberland Street between Lafayette and Green, this was in 1968. I went over to Steve Grossman's apartment on Hanson Place, down the street from the Clock Building.
Oh, you met Steve Grossman?
Yeah, we used to practice together.
Get out of
here. He wrote
out
some solos. Yeah. He had Charlie Parker solos, Jackie McLean. He had the John Coltrane solos from the ones he did, what's that? If I Were a Bell.
Right.
From that time period.
So he would write them. He would write them down too.
He wrote them out. Yeah. Also, who came over? Happened to be born in he and my wife were born in the same day, same month, same year. It was Mike Brecker. He would come over. That's when I met Mike. Very nice person. Very nice person. He was also a very dedicated musician. So I'm there with these two.
He was very kind to me too. The nicest, the heaviest people are the nicest people.
Yeah.
So humble.
Oh, let me just tell you something. I got so many stories. I got to tell you this one. It has nothing to do with either one of those musicians, but I got to tell this because it was funny to me. I went to the Village Vanguard a lot. Miles Davis's band was playing there. When you think of this, it's like we're in 2021. Back then, I would go to these clubs all the time. It was like second nature, and then, they were there. They were alive, playing good. I went there. Now the Vanguard, for those listeners who don't know the Vanguard, it's like in a basement. You go downstairs, and I went all the way around to the other side, and there's a stage. They have seating right up on the stage, right? On the side. I'm up there with my horn, right? I'm sitting on the side of the stage. I mean, in the seat, on the table, the ashtray on the table. Miles Davis, in those days you could smoke. So it was Miles, Wayne Shorter, Ron Carter, Tony Williams, Herbie Hancock.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm sure some of your younger listeners would go, "What?" Yeah. So I'm sitting there with my horn. Miles Davis was playing in mute in the microphone. And he looked over to me and looked at my horn. He looked at me again. Then he walked over to my table and put a cigarette in his ashtray, in my ashtray, and then looked at me, looked at the horn, went back out. He didn't have to say anything. It's like, don't you think you're going to take your horn up here? That's like the signal he gave me. but Miles was always cool with me. He spoke. He never was nasty to me. He just said, when I went by his house, they had a rehearsal. I saw him stand out in the street, and I saw Gary Bartz. I said, Gary, what's going on? He said, we're getting ready to rehearse. I said, you think he'll let me check out the rehearsal? So he said, ask him. So I said, man, I should have known better. So I asked Miles, nobody checks out my rehearsals. So that was it. But every time I would see him, he would always speak to me very cordially. Unfortunately, a lot of these musicians are not here anymore. It's just a memory. And you, it's like, it's unbelievable. It's like this didn't exist. It was like something I dreamed. Okay. When I first got to New York, see, I'm from Jersey originally, Newark, and I grew up in East Orange. And I was started in music singing doo-wop. And that's how we got our ears together. That was our ear training, singing doo-wop, because we didn't have any instruments. And one person would hit a note, we would harmonize. And only thing we knew was that you're off. It wasn't sharp or flat, but you're off. Third time, you're off, And we sang a song called Just the Kind of People in the World. And you know what? I found out my wife's brother wrote that song. And he sang with the original Little Anthony and the Imperials. They're from Fort Greene, Brooklyn. And that's my wife's brother. He's still around.
Wow.
I would love to interview him because he knew everybody. Sam Cooke, Otis Redding, everybody, So we were doing the doo-wop, and a friend of mine, very close friend of mine, he started playing bass in high school. And I never realized how he started, because sometimes, you grow up with people and years later you see them, you're playing together. He played baritone saxophone in junior high school. Next thing I know, he's playing bass in our dance band. Then he wound up playing with John Hendricks. He played with Elvin Jones, and he was a very good bass player around the scene in New York and Harlem, and he was very well known. He died recently. A lot of my friends died from that time period. A lot of them died. His name is Andy McLeod.
I knew Andy McLeod.
You know Andy?
Yeah.
He was a character, boy. And he played with me a gig I did every Friday in Brooklyn on Nostrand Avenue. I had Benito Gonzalez on piano, and Andy was on bass. It was a fun gig. Andy knew a lot of tunes. I love working with Andy.
Wow. You were living in Manhattan, or where were you at?
I lived in Brooklyn. I moved to Brooklyn in '68, Cumberland Street.
Oh, 68.
Between Green and Lafayette Avenue.
So you about 11 years older than me, right? I'm 61. 1959 I was born. When were you born?
48.
So that's a big 10 years, because I missed a lot. You know what I'm trying to say, right? A lot happened between 1960 and 1970. You know what I'm saying?
I know.
It seems like you were so fortunate to be, and honestly, it's almost like you created it. I believe we create our own reality a lot of times. The courage it took you to call John Coltrane, and then seek this out, and then get in you had a car, you drove out to Long Island.
In a 1951 red Ford convertible.
Now I just want to say, just imagine if you did not do that, right? Your whole life probably would not be the same, because that singular man, that the cat, I feel was so special, changed your life actually, but by him being so generous with you, almost like a relative. And he didn't know you. You could have been some
Right,
kind of axe murderer as far as
right, right,
but
right.
and tell me what you told, because I've met Ravi a couple of times, but I'm not friends with Ravi, But tell me
Hmm.
what you told Ravi about his father.
I said, well, I met Robbie because he was a special guest with Odin Pope Saxophone Choir.
Mhm.
And we got to talking, and I said, I met Robbie, he was about 4 years old. And I said, of course, you heard your father was one of the greatest saxophone players that ever lived, and he was a great musician and everything. But I said, I know your father's a different aspect. He was a humanitarian. I said, he just talked to me, invited me to his concert, invited me to his house, got me paid for a snowplow to get me out the snow, wrote out changes for me. He was tired. He was sick. He was sick. He died that year. He died in July of that year.
It was 1967 he passed.
Right, right.
Huh.
And I was very depressed at the time because I wanted to get together again with him, you know, but time didn't allow it, man. And I told Robbie, I said, man, your father he just treated me like I was part of his family. He treated me so special. I'll never forget that.
And what I would like to get to is what it's people like that bring that spirit, that soul, that reality, that into their playing, and that's
Mm-hmm.
what's touching people. Like I used to, I started to realize, because